Hey guys, SeetherCord here, and welcome back to another installment of my top 5 furry related video games series here on YouTube. We're now at around the halfway point when it comes to Nintendo's handheld lineup of games. Last time we covered Nintendo's first real update when it comes to their serious entrance into the handheld market, which is known as the Nintendo Game Boy Color, and we're now at Nintendo's final stage of the Game Boy part of the evolution when it comes to the handheld market of gaming for them. And this is known as the Nintendo Game Boy Advance. The Game Boy Advance had 3 main variations when it came to the console, and it started off with the original Thickums model just known as the Game Boy Advance, and then they went into my opinion the best variation as well as the most financially successful one, which is known as the Game Boy Advance SP, which adopted the foldable flip cell phone design which also introduced the backlight. And finally, we have the only variation that kind of failed, which was the Game Boy Micro, which was a super tiny variation that had the brightest screen and also had designable faceplates. I must add, by the way, that the Japanese exclusive Super Mario Bros. 20th Anniversary Famicom Edition looks absolutely amazing, and is one of my favorite console designs of all time. The series also introduced a lot of awesome accessories and cool extended features such as link cables, which gave you the ability to access exclusive content in GameCube games through the Game Boy Advance, as well as introduce multiplayer for certain games via multiple Game Boy Advances connected together. There was also the e-reader, which would be the scanner that you would insert into the Game Boy cartridge slot, and you would buy these game cards that would let you access certain exclusive games by swiping them. The Game Boy Advance to me had the best games of the Game Boy series compared to the original Game Boy and Game Boy Color, and to me really put the games close to the level of power that the console games had at the time. And what other better way to do a video today than to list off the best furry-centered games for this list. So with that all out of the way, let's take a look at the top 5 best furry-centered Game Boy Advance games. For number 5 on this list, we have ourselves 4 games that come from a franchise that originally did not start off on a Nintendo console. It actually originated from the original Sony PlayStation, and this franchise is Spyro the Dragon. Spyro the Dragon originally started off as a trilogy of games that were released for the PlayStation 1, which as of the past few years have surged in extreme popularity once again due to the release of the Spyro Reignited trilogy. After the end of the original trilogy, Insomniac Games decided to release brand new games for the handheld market, and these 4 games were Season of Ice, Season of Flame, Attack of the Rhinox or Spyro Adventure, and Orange, the Cortex Conspiracy or Spyro Fusion. These games provide a fun top-down Spyro adventure that still gives off the essence of the original trilogy. Definitely try out these games if you want a nice Spyro adventure and experience on the go. For number 4, we got 2 more games from Rare that are entering the handheld lineup from the console side, and that franchise is the Banjo-Kazooie series. The 2 Banjo games that Rare has released for the Game Boy Advance are Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge and Banjo Pilot. Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge continues similar gameplay style to both Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie on the Nintendo 64, except this time around they implement a top-down perspective into the well-known collectathon style gameplay of the 2 Nintendo 64 games. So you could say that this could be a sort of direct sequel to both Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie. Now when it comes to Banjo Pilot, however, we have ourselves a racing game with freaking airplanes. This is the only time, and I wish that it was the only time, where the Banjo franchise entered the racing genre. But overall, both these games are a lot of fun, and if you enjoy both collectathons and racing games, then please check these games out if you have a Game Boy Advance. For number 3 on this list, we have 2 spin-off games each starring one of the side characters from the Super Mario universe. These characters being both Donkey Kong and Yoshi. And these games they are starring in are DK King of Swing and Yoshi's Topsy Turvy. To begin with DK King of Swing, we have ourselves a puzzle-solving game where you play as Donkey Kong, and it involves you swinging from vines, branches, letters, and many other objects while also attacking enemies and picking up bananas for additional health. The game starts off easy, but then eventually ramps up in difficulty very quick. Even with the added difficulty, it's still a fun challenge nonetheless. When it comes to Yoshi's Topsy Turvy, we have a platforming game that features a built-in tilt sensor for the cartridge, which you use to manipulate the game's environments. I would say that this game is extremely fun to play on the Game Boy Advance SP, because it is pretty crazy and surreal to just physically move the Game Boy. And it's also kind of crazy knowing that if you want to play this game on the GameCube's Game Boy player, then you're literally going to have to pick up the GameCube and tilt it while you play. Now if it comes to playing this game on an emulator, then I don't know what to tell you. Overall, both of these games are very unique for the Game Boy Advance, and I would definitely recommend at least giving them a try. For number 2 on this list, we have 3 games from our favorite blue hedgehog, Sonic. While Sega was nearing the end of the time developing consoles, they decided to start focusing on their games solely and releasing them for previous competitor consoles. And the best example of this is the Sonic Advance trilogy for the Game Boy Advance. This time around, Sega entrusted the developer Dimps to produce these games. These games have the heart, soul, and essence of the hours of fun and quality gameplay that the original Sonic trilogy gave off. So if you definitely want something brand new that is a great continuation of the original 2D Sonic trilogy, then the Sonic Advance games are perfect for you. And for number 1 on this list, we again have to address Pokemon, because it can't be a list of the best handheld Nintendo games for any console unless you add in Pokemon. And the games that we will be addressing for the Game Boy Advance are the main series titles, Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, and the remakes of Pokemon Red and Blue from the original Game Boy, known as Fire Red and Leaf Green. For Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, these were considered the first games in the Pokemon lineup to get a decent amount of criticism, due to them not really adding that many new changes, especially when it comes to the gameplay and graphics. Still, these games were super successful, and both Ruby and Sapphire together make up the best-selling games for the Game Boy Advance. Now when it comes to Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green, however, we have ourselves a way more positive response. With this remake of Pokemon Red and Blue, most critics praise the fact that the games introduced new features while still maintaining the traditional gameplay of the series. These 2 games as well were a huge success for Nintendo and Game Freak, and together they are the second best-selling games for the Game Boy Advance. And that pretty much wraps up my list of the top 5 best furry-centered Nintendo Game Boy Advance games. How do you guys feel about my list? Do you guys agree? Do you guys disagree? Is there any games that I left out that I should have mentioned? Were there not? Let me know down in the comment section down below. If you enjoy my content and want to further help out my channel, please consider donating to me on Patreon as well as my Ko-fi. Also, please consider smashing that like button, turning on the notification bell, and subscribing altogether. Also, please consider checking out my 2 gaming channels known as SeetherCord Games and SeetherChills. All will be linked down in the description down below. Thank you guys again so much for watching. I've been SeetherCord, and I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye, everyone.